I'd like to ask, was Rishi Sunak's speech today, was it alarmist? And are we at war or aren't we?
Bob Seeley.
It wasn't alarmist, but it's a good question, and I think the basic problem is, if you want a definition of war, there are a lot of academics who spend a lot of time working on it. My PhD was in forms of Russian warfare, and if you want a technical academic answer, the Russians consider themselves at conflict with the West, and they consider conflict to be a mix of military and non-military tools. So everything from orchestras to nuclear weapons, religion, assassination, disinformation, blackmail, etc., etc. So rather than talking about war, which has a specific sort of conventional tanks, planes, ships definition, I think it's probably more useful to talk about conflict. The Russians have been preparing for conflict since the early 2000s. They spent a lot of time developing a military doctrine that had a military and non-military aspects to it, and a new form of total war. Putin declared the new form of war in 2007. We did our best to pretend it wasn't happening for years, and then he invaded Georgia, and then he invaded Ukraine, and then he invaded a second time, and now he's threatening the world or Europe with nuclear weapons on a very regular basis. So we are in conflict with Russia. We are in conflict probably with Iran as well, fits the same definition, and we are in economic and other forms of conflict with China as well. We are not yet at war with any of them.
Now, Bob, let me just ask you this, because you just mentioned your PhD, and the title of your PhD was Uniting Ways of War for Perpetual Conflict, an examination of contemporary Russian warfare. You also, good plug for the PhD. I hope it turns into a book.
To be honest, I've got until the end of the year to finish it, so yes.
Good. Well, the other thing is this. You also wrote a paper about Huawei and Chinese involvement in the 5G network.
Yeah.
Can I just ask you, when you heard that speech today by the Prime Minister, which was billed as a big foreign policy speech, why were we not hearing the very kind of things that you just outlined so eloquently at a deeper level than just some surface stump speech, which is what we heard?
I don't think it was a surface stump speech, and I think Rishi's at his best when he's talking about policy. So actually, I thought it was a really good speech, and it's a refreshing speech. Look, for people like me, and I did slightly accidentally, I did 10 years in the military because I got mobilised as a reservist in 2007, and 4 tours later, I got demobilised 3 weeks before the 2017 general election when I got elected for the Isle of Wight. It's been a privilege to serve them since. So folks like me have been slightly ahead of the curve, but the important thing now is for our most senior political leaders to be getting up to speed on this. And let's just remember, the previous leader of the Labour Party was someone who wanted to scrap the army, scrap nuclear weapons. So there's been a big catch-up, not least in the Labour Party, because they were going in the wrong way for years on this.
Now, Lucy, the question is, was Rishi Sunak's speech today extremely alarmist? Are we at war today or aren't we?
I think the problem is that even though it was billed as a foreign policy speech, and even though there was much reference made to the geopolitics that's happening at the moment, actually that wasn't really the messaging of the speech. And the subtext of it was, I am a safe pair of hands. Those people over there are not. And that, in a way, is perhaps why it was so light on detail, that actually there were too many other things that he wanted to focus on. And I think when you look at the speech and you try and think about the audience, who's actually going to be listening to it, it was about framing the forthcoming general election as better the devil you know, or let's just stick with the people that you know. And it was, as somebody I think said in your previous hour, that it was a bit like that, the boyfriend coming back to the girlfriend saying, you've got to believe me, nobody will ever love you as much as I do, which is a bit like saying, Keir Starmer will make a mess of all of this. Well, but also if you had that sense of that 49, don't trust me, don't blame me for the 49 days. It's like, don't blame me for the affair I had with the gym instructor, just keep going. It's not about the war, it's not about the geopolitics, it's more about the relationship that Rishi Sunak wants to have with the electorate. But the problem is, I don't think they're even listening.
Lucy, I didn't realise that we would get into relationships, because you are a relationship expert as well, so quickly within 5 minutes. Go on, Bob.
But it's all about relationships.
You're right.
It's all about relationships. And therefore, if you're saying, my worry is that the last time a government, and it happens to be the same one, was trying to scare us into doing things, it was around COVID. And a lot of the things that happened, we're now beginning to look back with distance and reflect on and say, did you have to do so much scaremongering in terms of trying to change our behaviour. My worry, I don't think Rishi Sunak needed to do this kind of speech, or if he did, he needed to do it on day one in Downing Street on the day that he took office and to repudiate what had gone before. But unfortunately now it's coming across as scaremongering, and I don't think the electorate will watch it.
I didn't quite buy that, but I think you make a really interesting point about relationships. Yep. When it comes to scaremongering, I'm sorry, the Labour Party just relented. Rishi's right to say the Labour Party is just telling us that everything is awful. It isn't. And actually what Rishi was doing was framing the generalities of the speech in terms of security. Now, part of that is living in a more dangerous world, but part of that is the fact that we look after pensioners much better. So it's about protecting the triple lock. It's about sort of, making sure our foreign policy works better, making sure that we can be looking after security here, which is, and we've arrested, another 3 potential or alleged spies just today. So actually, I think it's about looking at security in the round and just saying, you can trust us. And I think rightly saying, look at Labour, look at what they had to offer.
Well, let's see what Khalid Mahmood makes of it for Labour. Khalid.
Well, Bob's been very kind to Rishi. I think if he was saying the things that he's saying...
Election coming up.
I would certainly believe him. I don't think Rishi has got the right to say this because he was just rebel-rousing. That's the whole speech. Look at the last 14 years of the Conservative government. We've got the lowest military that we've ever had. So how's that investing in our war effort? Manufacturing is at the lowest effort that we've had. I've been pushing personally, along with Sir Keir Starmer, John Healey, even before this current leadership took over. Keir Starmer was committed to introducing manufacturing. John Healey is working extremely hard to do that. We've got the right stack of cards to make sure we do deliver for the people what we need to deliver and not just posture on the issue of war. We want to make sure that we have a proper services that deliver in terms of military, in terms of intelligence, and in terms of what we need to do to support.
So, Khalid, why won't Sir Keir Starmer commit to 2.5% of GDP or more on defence now?
Well, he's got to look at the books, and that's as simple as that. He wants to do it, and I'm sure he will do it. I trust him totally that he will do it. But what we have to do is what we inherit.
And so he's scrapping the non-dom tax. He's going to scrap the VAT exemption on private school fees.
Most of that's been borrowed by the Tories already. And the fact it depends what we got left to spend in that field as well.
Do you think it's enough of a priority, though, defence for Labour? Because, I mean, that was the Sunak pitch, wasn't it? That, you're safer with me, you can't trust Labour on this. I mean, do you buy this?
Yeah, I mean, it's very obvious to me that this, more than anything else, was an election framing speech. He used the word repeatedly that is absolutely key here for him, which is this is a choice for the next election. This is a choice between my vision of an insecure world, but I can deliver you safety. It's about framing the election around those issues. I did find it a bit disorientating at times, though, because you've got this very difficult challenge he has, and he's trying to explain the fact that life hasn't gotten much better for the last 14 years in the kind of domestic economic scene. Obviously, that's not entirely Rishi's fault, but I think that the Tories do have a level of responsibility for that. So saying, well, the world's too dangerous to risk any kind of change, it probably is kind of effective messaging. Is it enough to move the Tories from where they currently are in the polls to a victory? I would seriously doubt it. But I think we're going to hear a lot more about this idea of choice. This is a choice. You've got to think about this, not just the Tories being bad, but contrast that to the risk of Labour, which is really what the election.
But Matthew, were you really buying it? Look, you're working for a think tank, let's just put it politely, that's on the right. I mean, are you hearing enough mood music that is actually saying that this government really can step up to the challenges that this country faces after 14 years in government, when people are already tired and people are wanting a change? Do you think, apart from platitudes, we're actually hearing some beef?
Look, I don't think so in the broad sense. I think the government is a bit of a spent force when it comes to policy reform. There have been a lot of efforts tried, and there's lots of bits and pieces going on, but I don't see a big vision on something like, which I think is probably the most important issue, planning, about being able to build more houses, being able to increase density, being able to get infrastructure out there. Like, I just don't think they've done enough on that issue alone, which is a key reason why the UK isn't growing, let alone a whole bunch of other problems that the country is facing. Plus, it's got historically high taxes at the same time. Public services are struggling. I mean, it's sad. It's tragic. There have been some successes. Education reform is perhaps an early one. Standards much higher than they used to be. Not everything is negative. We can't.
Okay. Can I just put it very quick? I just put some facts out there. We're the world's 4th largest exporter. We've overtaken France to be the world's 7th largest manufacturer. Everyone says that manufacturing is dead in this country. It's simply not true. Earnings are now rising at the fastest. In the last year, earnings have been rising at the fastest level, or wage rises for 16 years. Since 2010, we've We've had the fastest growing economy in Europe. And actually, most critically, better than all those impressive stats is the fact that if you look at the industries of the future, we are one of 3 nations on earth that has a 1 trillion tech sector. Us, the Chinese and the Americans. We are leading Europe in life sciences, having overtaken the Swiss, and we now have more studio space than outside anywhere than Hollywood in the world.
But Bob, is anyone listening?
That's
is anyone listening?
That is my point. So my worry, my real worry about this speech is it was a missed opportunity, because what you really need to do in the run-up to a general election is to seize the narrative and create momentum. And the way that you do that is to focus initially on the things that people really focus on. And all the polling shows us that what people are most concerned about, both for themselves and for their families, but also for the country, is the cost of living and the economy more generally. So my view is that you ought to give a really stonking speech about that, and then you seize the narrative, you set the agenda, you build momentum, and then you can start to have other speeches that deal with all these amazing things that are meant to have happened, and you remind people of what has happened in the last 14 years. However, but you're not going to do that because no one is listening.
Indeed. Now, just on the no one is listening point, just bringing it to Lord Kinnock, who said only a couple of days ago that people are disillusioned with the Tories. That is very, very clear. He obviously lost in 92 with that ridiculous speech he gave and counted his chickens before they were hatched. And he's being very careful to say now, no one's in love with Labour. Khalid, no one's in love with Labour.
Oh, we are. Just to let you know, in the West Midlands, for the first time, we managed to elect regional mayor. That was a huge effort that we put together. We won that because people wanted a change in the West Midlands. Andy Street, formerly one of probably the most loved people in the West Midlands. A lot of people liked him, but we came through and we beat him. And that is where he doesn't understand. He doesn't understand where the people stand. Neil is somebody who's been there for a long time. And unfortunately, what Neil's got to understand is that Keir Starmer is not Neil Kinnock. And that's a big difference.
Okay, just on that point.
Just very briefly.
He won by 1,500 votes. And what was the first thing he talked about? Did he talk about housing? Did he talk about jobs? No. He talked about Gaza. Sums you lot up.
No, he's talking about housing. He's looking to bring the buses into back.
He lost a lot of votes in Gaza as well to the Greens.
And to the independents.
That's very true.
Votes.
Very true.
But we still, despite all that, we came through.
That I think is the real lesson. That despite all that, you still won. Very interesting.